Welcome to Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave, the clean approach to building your successful business. Now, let's introduce Tom Borg and Dr. Dave Miles. Welcome to Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave, where we bring you the clean approach to building your successful business. And when I mean clean, I'm not talking about spick and span and dust mops. This podcast is all about the acronym CLEAN. We're all about communication, leadership, engagement.
And no drama.
And no drama, absolutely. So today we're going to be talking about part 3 of a 4-part series on 4 strategies to navigate the next 4 quarters. When we were talking about this before, most people do 3-year strategic plans. And to be honest with you, most times you can't see past the next 3 days, much less 3 years. So what can we do in 3-month increments? What can we do to put a few strategies in place to get us through at least the next 4 quarters, the next year? So part 1, we talked about employee stress, especially with people reintegrating into the workforce as things were opening. Now things are starting to close, but they're going to reopen again. So you got that stress back and forth, whether you're closing, whether you're opening. And honestly, employee stress is a major factor. But also don't forget about your own stress level. You worry so much about everybody else that you're not taking care of yourself. Second part, we talked about communication and the importance of communication with your team and in your organization. So today we're going to talk about emotional intelligence. So Tom, get us started off on what we're going to talk to our listeners today about emotional intelligence.
Well, Dave, for sure, emotional intelligence is one of the hottest topics out there in the leadership circles. Now, why is it so important? It's because we're in some stressful times, and we're finding that the mature people, emotional quotient of people that are scoring very high in that area are doing the best job leading their companies. Their companies are the most profitable, they're getting the best results, and they're maintaining a balance within that organization, especially in a time that's somewhat imbalanced, to say the least.
No, I would agree with that. And one of the things that I've always noticed is that the higher you go in an organization, the more important emotional intelligence is.
Yes, it is.
It's super important. But what I found out, and when we did a little bit of research for this episode, was that it's not just high leadership positions where EQ is important. Well, emotional intelligence, according to Dr. Travis Bradberry, is one source. And then we actually have a Harvard Business School article from April 2019. Both of them talk about emotional intelligence counts for nearly 90% of what sets high performers apart. More with your peers that have the same technical skills, the same knowledge, the same experience. So you think all things being equal, they should perform the same. Mm-hmm. But your high performers, 90% of what puts them apart from their peers and being those high performers is high levels of emotional intelligence.
And Dave, I think one of the reasons why that's so true is that when you think about emotional intelligence, if a person has that, they're able to work with other people, whether it be their co-workers or whether it be their employees. They're able to connect with them. They're able to understand them. And as a result, they earn that person's respect, and they're do a better job leading.
Oh, absolutely. And when we're going to talk a little bit more about leadership in emotional intelligence, but specifically if you're as an individual, you've talked about that for high performers. I'll go back to Dr. Bradberry's work. He had 2 other stats that I thought were pretty interesting and were timely for the topic. One, he mentioned that emotional intelligence is responsible for about 58% of your job performance overall. And the second stat that he had was that people with high emotional intelligence make about $29,000 more annually than those with low EQ. Their low EQ counterparts are about $29,000 less. And as you mentioned, I'm sure in the executive leadership positions, that number gets drastically different.
Yeah, put a 0 after it.
Very good possibility. It certainly wouldn't surprise me. Well, one of the things we wanted to do is talk about what emotional intelligence is, why it's important, and we already covered a little bit about the why it's important, but also, how can you use it and what can you do to how to develop yourself, develop your team. But I want to start out with what it is, and
Yes.
I've pulled a definition, so that way we're all starting from the same base. You'll hear us use the term emotional intelligence and EQ. You're like, okay, well, that's an I. Most people don't abbreviate emotional intelligence EI. They EQ simply like IQ. And so it goes, you think of the two kind of hand in hand. One's static, one is not quite as static. You can change and improve your emotional intelligence, but it's defined as the ability to understand and manage your own emotions, as well as recognize and influence the emotions of those around you.
So, absolutely.
Well, and it was real popular in the 90s. Mayer and Salovey were the two researchers that really kind of coined the term, but they're not the ones that knocked it out of the park. Daniel Goleman, psychologist, he was the one that really got the emotional intelligence concept popularized with his book with the same name, Emotional Intelligence. So if you haven't had a chance to get that book and read that book, it is well worth the time to look at that. So, like I said, one of the things is that as we went back to the 90% of the high performers have it, the technical skills, I mean, you have to have these things to get into the job. And, those are barriers of entry. You're not going to get a position as a physician if you don't have a medical license. You're not going to get a position as a lawyer if you don't have a law degree and are certified by the bar. Same thing with engineers, architects. There's certain technical skills and licensures that you have to have just to get in the door, but the successful ones in those fields are the ones that do have high degrees of emotional intelligence. So the other thing that I noticed is that we were talking about hiring managers. Hiring managers, if you talk about to put together a team of folks, I think it was Career Builder that came out with the stat that 71% of employers said that they valued EQ over IQ. Talking about that, and I wonder if this is relevant nowadays, that they're reporting that high emotional intelligence workers are more likely to stay calm under pressure. That wouldn't be important nowadays with all the crazy going on, would it? They resolve conflict effectively, and they respond to coworkers with empathy.
Yes.
We'll get into why that's important later.
Yes. Well, I think one of the keys there, Dave, is when you talk about emotional quotient in the workplace, whether it be with the CEO, the president, or the frontline or the leadership team, that's the type of person that has a high level of emotional quotient, that they are kind of the glue within that organization. People come to them with their issues. People trust them. This type of person is able to relate to other people, and they also are able to relate well to themselves. So it's a good balance there. That's where we're going with this for sure.
Yes. And so there's 4 components that the original research looked at, and there's really a 5th component that we look when we go into the practical portion of actually measuring emotional intelligence. So the 5 parts of it is basically there's a self part and an others part. So are you self-aware, and can you regulate yourself? So self-awareness and self-regulation are the first 2 components. On the others part of it, you've got a social awareness. Are you able to read the room? Are you able to read the surroundings and things that are going on? And then social regulation. Are you really be able to respond to that and and deal with people with empathy? And then the last one is motivation. The internal just drive and ambition and motivation that you have apart from other things that could affect motivation.
Absolutely. And something we should mention about the social awareness. So is the person able to read what's going on in another person? What are some of the things that are of concern to them? What is this person upset? Is this person worried? What is it? A person that is able to read other people well, that has that social awareness, can pick up on those things, and they can help connect with that individual just that much easier and help to bridge that gap of where that person is and where they need to be in order to be more productive as an employee or a leader.
Oh, absolutely. And think about it in a meeting. How many times have either you done it yourself or you've seen people do it, or people have put their foot in their mouth because they just can't read the room. They realize this just isn't the time to bring up that topic. This is not the time for whatever it is. They end up saying something, and then people look at them and they're like, really? So I mean, it's important to be able to get those types of be able to read the room more or less, to be able
Absolutely.
to tell them.
Otherwise, that person's going to turn people off and not even realize it. Now they've just shut down any openness or receptivity on the listeners' parts that person's trying to influence in the first place.
Yes. Now it's funny because there was another organizational psychologist, Dr. Urich, that had done some research, and this is funny. And there's some other research and statistics that
Hmm.
something similar to this, but it looked at different organizations and it said 95% of the people that they surveyed thought that they were very self-aware.
Mm.
But when it came down to it, only 10 to 15% actually were.
Now that's a problem.
Yes, it's kind of like the ones that 85% of the people think that they're above average. Well, then when you do the math, it ain't
Yeah,
jiving,
and
right?
that's
So
right.
it's just not. But
And
if
that
you, what's that?
and that's so true, Dave. And at the same time, uh, that's what people need to know where they stand and where they need to go. How can they move the dial? And that's the beautiful thing about emotional quotient. It's something that can be developed. It's not something like your emotional, rather your IQ, which is pretty much set. It's not going to move a whole lot more. So
Yeah,
emotional quotient is something that can be worked with, and with a good coach or facilitator, you can get that person to develop their emotional quotient, and as a result, become more effective as an individual and leader.
oh, absolutely. And then when you talk about just dealing with a team, you're like, okay, I can work on my own emotional intelligence, but what does that have to do with my team?
Hmm.
Same set of research from Dr. Urich. They talked about that working with colleagues who are not self aware, who don't have that level of self awareness as far as their emotional intelligence, can cut a team's success in half.
Absolutely.
Do you want a 50% cut in your productivity for your team because you've got a couple of folks that are a little less self aware than they should?
Hmm. Well, and Dave, remember, what's the reason, the number one reason why people will leave an organization? They don't leave the organization, they're leaving
Yep.
a
People.
supervisor or a
Yep.
manager, whoever they report to. And that emotional intelligence is a major factor in that person's effectiveness to influence that person to want to stay and excel or look for greener pastures.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I mean, it increases stress, it decreases motivation, and in the big picture, like you said, it's John Maxwell had the quote: "People don't leave organizations; people leave people."
That's right.
And you're absolutely right. If you have a leader that is has a high turnover, especially nowadays, do you really have the money to be able to? Turnover is expensive.
Very expensive.
Do you, as much as we need to run lean and get things done, do you really have the money to be able to just keep churning people? Probably not. Self management is the same thing. Self management, once you're aware of yourself, got to be able to manage yourself. That's the one side of the equation.
Hmm.
Marshall Goldsmith had a great book called Triggers.
Hmm.
And the thing about self management is this: it's enough to realize, wow, something's got me going. I'm triggered, I'm upset, or I'm getting ready to get upset. It's that awareness of it. It is that absolute split second instead of something triggers you and you automatically react. And
Hmm.
it's just habit. We all do it. I mean, it's just the way it is. But to
And
be
it,
aware of it, that gives you that split second to make a conscious decision. And now I can actually do something else.
exactly. It's like as if they don't know, they don't know. And that's
Exactly.
when trouble arrives at the door.
Right. And like Goldsmith says in his book Triggers, I mean, that's the now I know what I don't know. Now I know it.
Hmm.
Now I know this is triggering, this is upset. And it gives you, if you just have that half a second to be able to
Absolutely.
throw in a little bit of conscious prefrontal cortex action
Mm.
and then be able to make a conscious
Oh, yeah.
decision on exactly what's going to happen, maybe you can choose to not put your foot in your mouth in the middle of that meeting again.
Yes, you got that right. Yeah, and that's why we're so excited about this because the time is right for people to become more aware of the fact that emotional quotient plays a major role in the success of themselves and their people and their company as a whole, and they can do something about it. So that's what we're here to tell them about.
Oh yeah. Now when you talk about on the social end of it, with their social awareness or social regulation,
Hmm.
one of the DDI, big global leadership development company, they
Yes.
rank empathy. And here's the thing:
Yes.
to excel in social awareness, practice empathy. And they did some research and they found out that empathy ranks as the number one leadership skill,
Wow.
reporting that leaders who master empathy perform more than 40% higher in tasks such as coaching, encouraging others, engaging others, and in, this might be important, decision making.
Wow. See?
Just throwing that out there.
And you think that affects the bottom line? Absolutely. Comes back to that
Yeah,
bottom line.
40% higher in decision making. in making better decisions because you're socially aware? Of course it does. That's direct to the bottom line.
And that's exactly what these studies have been pointing out. These people that are the most proficient with their emotional quotient, their companies are more profitable. And in the end, that's an important factor in a company's success. Can they keep on a profitable arc?
Right. And when you're talking about being able to communicate effectively with your team and then with your team to be able to have, build a high level of emotional intelligence, it all
Hmm.
starts with the communication end of it.
That's right.
But if you can build on that aspect and throw this in there, that really makes a big difference. So you talk about managing, the social regulation and relationship management. Here's an interesting stat from SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management. They did a recent survey. It said 72% of employees ranked, quote, respectful treatment of all employees at all levels, unquote, as the top factor in job satisfaction.
Sure. And we can ask our listeners and the jobs they've had over their lifetime if they can recall a leader who did not have that respect from the people that worked for that individual. How did that make them feel? How did that make that individual feel who was reporting to that person? They didn't want to stay there a whole lot longer.
Absolutely. And it is. It's a big deal. And you think about getting triggered. You talk about your self-awareness, your self-motivation, and then dealing with others. A couple interesting stats that I thought was is that studies showed that on average, a negative experience can exert these psychological effects, mind, on your body for approximately 4 hours.
Wow,
You get that
stress.
endorphin rush, and that 4 hours is how long it takes the endorphins to kind of remain and eventually get flushed out of your system. So if you think about this, you have a negative experience, and I'm talking about you're coming into work, someone cuts you off, you slam on brakes, everybody's screaming and cussing, you're wound up, you're not worth much for the next 4 hours.
That's right.
Two of those negative experiences in the course of a day, and you're shot. I mean, how much productive time are you really going to be able to get in? Truly productive time if you're still dealing with
That's right.
those on a daily basis. And I would bet that you would probably know some people in our listeners would probably know some folks that have gone through that before, that everything's a crisis, everything's a big deal, everything is just, oh my God, it's the worst thing ever. How productive do you think they are during the day?
Not very.
Not so much, not so much. So how can this really, so how can folks take this and put this together and use it in their team? I mean, you mentioned about IQ being really static and emotional intelligence not quite as much.
Hmm. So one of the things we need to do, people need to become aware of what their emotional quotient is, and there's some great assessments on the market that do that. Dave and I handle some very fine ones that we use with our clients. But that's the first place. You got to start to measure what is your emotional quotient to begin with. That's what we have to go from the beginning. Where are you? Do an inventory. Once that assessment comes back, now we've got some workable points. We can work with that individual to coach them, to help them actually develop that emotional quotient by doing certain exercises, certain thought processes, certain activities that are going to allow them to re-engage their emotional development, and as a result, move that needle like we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. And the thing is, there are very specific ways, whether you're talking about an individual or whether you're talking about a team, that you can
Hmm.
help to improve and build your emotional intelligence.
Yes.
So it's not truly static. There's things with your temperament not going to change a lot. There's some things with your behavioral style, maybe not going to change a tremendous amount without some kind of traumatic incident happening. Your
Hmm.
competencies, you can always build on your competencies and get better at certain things, which is
Hmm.
awesome, which is a direct reflection of what you've spent your lifetime building. Uh, and then you have certain things that are kind of under the surface that are driving forces that really just push and motivate you, and a
Hmm.
lot of those just don't change except maybe building on your competencies.
Hmm.
Emotional intelligence, there are good ways to actually be able to take that and whether it's your team, your organization, yourself, and be able to improve that.
That's right. And that's the key. I think if you can improve, then you're going to see results. And it's not just for the leader, it's for the team. As everyone develops that awareness of their own emotional quotient and how they can develop it, that's a track to be on if you want to navigate these uncertain waters that we have with us now, and will be other uncertain waters that will be experiencing in the future.
Yeah, this is not the first time that something traumatic, dramatic, or stressful has happened in our country. It probably won't be the last.
No.
So it's one of those things that what can you do to kind of set yourself up good for now and for the next time that something comes around.
So I think that's what the first step that a leader needs to take is to look at his team or her team and do an inventory of their emotional quotients as a whole, and then come up with a strategy that will allow them to develop that emotional quotient so that everybody wins. And that's not just the people that run the company or the employees or leadership team, but also the ultimate end benefactor of this, and that'll be the client or customer who we're all trying to serve.
Absolutely. So tell our listeners a little bit about some things that we can do as far as samples or different things that we can offer, or things that we would like to at least be able to outreach to some of the listeners that are that have been faithful and listen to Business Smarts Radio, and some things that we would like to end up doing.
Absolutely. So what we can do is we can certainly we have information that will kind of give an overview of this in a little more specific manner. We could definitely send that out, a sample assessment so that they can see what it looks like. And if they would like, we would invite them to participate in actually going through an assessment for themselves personally, and that would be followed up with a report or a report and a debriefing from either Dave or myself that help them really understand that tool and know how to use it.
Okay, yeah, so that's Tom is right. Like I said, we both have a great tool, and there's a lot of good emotional intelligence surveys that are out there. One of the big ones, you have the EQI 2.0, that's based on Baron's model. But one of the things I love about the model that we use, the EQ assessment that we have through TTI, is that it's based on Daniel Goleman's research in a specific model of emotional intelligence, which is the one that I first learned from, and I really, really like myself. But yeah, we were able to offer a sample of the emotional intelligence assessment, one per organization. Happy to give a sample and sit down, like you said, and debrief and kind of show you what this is all about. And you can get a good measurement of your own. Of course, they can't do that for that pesky electric company keeps asking for something to keep the lights on. So we can't obviously do that for the entire organization, but we're more than happy to give you a sample for you as a leader, so you can kind of look and, we can see where we can put this together for your team. If it's a good fit, fantastic. If it's not, hey, at least you got some great information for yourself, and you can go from there. Absolutely. So how would people reach us?
Well, Dave, just check out that website that's on the screen there for either Dave or myself to reach out to us, and we would be happy to get back in touch with you with the necessary information that you need, and we'll take it the next step from there.
That sounds good. Any last words that you can think of for any of our listeners?
Well, I like what Agmendino was once quoted as saying. He said, in life, we're either headed away from a crisis, we're headed towards a crisis, or we're in the middle of a crisis. So it's best to learn how to navigate those crises before, during, and after, and it just makes for a better life.
I definitely think that you're going to be able to navigate the next 4 quarters and navigate either away from, towards, or in the middle of a crisis when you have a higher degree of emotional intelligence. Can't believe how important that is, and can't stress, what a difference it can make in your organization. So thank you all for watching Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave, and we will see you on the next one with part 4 of 4 on 4 ways for strategies to navigate the next 4 quarters. Take care.